The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on Because We Are All Equal. And obviously very happy belated International Women's Day. Thanks everyone for joining. I know that there's a lot of qualms out there with coronavirus going on, but just to remind everyone, you know, webinars and online conferences are such a great alternative to keep the community together. Now we're absolutely in for a treat with our amazing lineup of panelists, which I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. But just to let everyone know the format of today, it's basically a very simple panel discussion. I've got some free-to-find questions on all the themes we mentioned in the description, but please do provide your questions and we'll prioritise those. So let's start off with introductions. Obviously, I'm Harriet Hadley. I organise BEEqual, but I'm also the Community and Diversity Manager here at Kennedy. Also have on the panel Asif Sadiq, who's the Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at the Telegraph. Asif, do you want to do a little intro about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I currently head up Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at the Telegraph Media Group. Before that, I was Head of Diversity at EY Financial Services, and in a life prior to that, Head of Diversity for the Police Service.
Thank you, Asif. We also have Aubrey Stearn. She is currently the Interim CTO at Oakam. Aubrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, you've done most of it for me, but I am an interim CTO that takes tricky jobs. I'm probably a masochist. I find the broken things the most fun to fix. I'm currently at Oakam, in previous lives Nationwide, Pizza Hut, Travelodge, Arcadia.
Perfect.
That's it.
Amazing. Thanks, Aubrey. Just one moment. So we also have Katie Pether, who's the Digital Recruitment Lead at the Department for Education.
Hi everybody, so as Harriet said, I'm Katie. I currently work for DFE Digital as a digital recruitment lead, hiring digital specialists across lots of different locations for the Department for Education. Before I was in this role, I was working as a mental health community partner for the Department for Work and Pensions. So that basically meant that I was supporting people with varying mental health conditions, get into the workplace, find the right reasonable adjustments to make sure that they were safe in the workplace, and work with employers to better understand mental health conditions.
Amazing. And last but no means least, we've got Rose Grant, who also could be awarded the world's longest job title. She's the
Hi everybody, my name's Rose Grant. I work for DEFRA and I am the Ethnic Minority Secretariat Lead and Project Support Officer in Digital Data Technology, which is the Strategy Planning and Performance Hub. So yeah, I've been with DEFRA for a number of years and passionate about diversity and inclusion. And our network has actually been running for 20 years this year. So that's briefly a bit about me. Over to you, back to you, Harriet.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and start. Obviously, just to remind everyone, please do fire your questions over via the chat box. And if you, sorry, I've just got someone who can't hear us. Can everyone just let me know whether you can hear us or not on the panel? I'm going to send a message now. Oh, yes, we've got some other messages saying that we can hear us. There's just an individual that can't. So I'll continue. So yeah, please fire your questions via the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. If you do have a particular panelist you'd like to answer your question, do just let me know in your message. So first question's up for Katie. Do you have any tips or initiatives that have helped improve the diversity of your team?
This is a really interesting one, and I think it's probably a question that's on the lips of lots of people. I think we should probably start by saying historically trying to look at diversity within like the workforce and recruitment has been a nice to have, but now actually when we look at our community, the people that we're serving, it can't be a nice option. It needs to be something that every sort of company is doing. I can talk to you a little bit about what we've been trying here at DfE Digital, probably starting with challenging current recruitment processes that are in place. So say, for example, all of our recruitment is completely anonymous. So up until the point that you are at the interview, sitting in front of people, things are completely name blind. We wouldn't know the person's age, ethnic minority, we wouldn't know where they studied, what year they studied. And since introducing that, that's been something we've been able to see actually, since having name blind anonymous recruitment, we've seen people coming through to interview stage and being hired are a lot more diverse than we had previously. As you probably know, job adverts in government can sometimes be very jargon heavy, very word heavy, very policy heavy. We currently use softwares that will go through our job descriptions and make sure that they are accessible, they're open, that anybody can pick one up, read it and know what they mean. We've been using more open language. So we know, for example, women are less likely to apply for roles if they don't feel like they meet 80% or more of essential criteria. So instead of saying, as this candidate, you're expected to, we will say, as a delivery manager, you will be doing this. We are looking for this within you, and actually putting that personal touch into our job adverts. A big part of what we've been doing is working with our different support networks across DfE. So in DfE, we've been working with our BAME network, our Women's network, and our LGBT+ network to look at the way we're recruiting, to look at our panels, and to ensure that our panels actually reflect the communities that we are serving, that we are recruiting for, but also the communities within DfE we currently have. Outreach events, they're really great things that can sort of increase your the range of people that you are recruiting and getting your message out to. So for those of you who are in recruitment or looking to recruit into your workforce, I'd question, what events are you going to? So things like this, so BEEqual, working with Harriet and her team. Are you going to schools? Are you going into universities? So just today, some of our colleagues had a meeting with Manchester Met University, and we're looking at actually how do we get into universities and talk about the civil service as a place to work for people who've never seen it as an option before, which I think is always a really exciting thing. Welcome any questions on any of that stuff?
Perfect, thanks Katie. And I think for you to be able to answer this follow-up question, which is, have you tried to measure the impact of diversity hiring measures?
Okay, yeah. So historically, we really haven't had the data to be able to do that. But as of November last year, we now get through, after every campaign, information from people with diversity declaration. So actually, how many people have we had apply that would identify as what gender they identify with, what ethnicity, whether they say they disclose their disability, whether they don't. And as of November, we've been able to see that information for all of our recruitment campaigns, which means in the next few months, we will be able to see whether the work we're doing, working with yourselves, changing our job descriptions, doing outreach with universities and with colleges, is actually directly having an impact.
Thanks, Katie. And the same question to Asif. Obviously, you're the head of diversity, inclusion and belonging at the Telegraph. Have you also tried to measure the impact of diversity hiring measures?
Yes, so I think, I mean, I believe that, you know, some of the measurements show certain results, but I think what's more important than actually some of the measurements, or looking at how we're measuring diversity, is understanding the intersectionality, because we tend to measure based on what we perceive, or you know, the diversity questions we ask. So, you know, we look at things like gender, ethnicity, potential disability, and LGBTQ+. But you know, we all know people are more than one box, and you know, how do we ensure that the measurements are authentic is quite difficult. Plus, you know, a lot of measurements and a lot of organizations are usually at, you know, how many people are actually applying, but what we really need to start getting to is where the drop-off is. So what I mean by that is that, you know, yes, 50% of people who applied for a job might be females, but then where did they drop off? You know, was it at the paper sift stage? Was it at the interview stage? You know, was it at offer stage? To really understand where the challenges lie, And I think when it comes to the data, we're too quick to jump on the positive news of how many people applied, but not really challenge further into the different elements.
Thanks, Asif. And you started to talk about intersectionality there, and I know that this term is being thrown around a lot at the moment, and I know it's also quite difficult to understand. So would you be able to help the audience if they don't necessarily know what intersectionality is by giving us sort of a dummies only definition of it?
Sure, I'll try my best. So, you know, I think the key thing with understanding intersectionality is, or what it means, is to understand that people have more than one diverse characteristic. And when you bring them together, we can hold multiple characteristics. So, for example, someone can be female, they can be black, they can have a disability, and they can be gay. And that's the intersectionality, where they've got different pieces to their identity. So intersectionality basically means about understanding that people are not just one box, but there's numerous other elements to us, and things interlink. So, you know, even when we look at, for example, and why this is important, by the way, especially in measurements, you know, when we look at gender, you know, we know women, you know, in a lot of organizations, there's a pay gap, which is quite topical because it's coming around the corner. However, you know, research again shows that when you bring intersectionality into it, so if you look at black women, they have a bigger pay gap, or, you know, someone, or women with a disability, or, you know, women with a different sexual orientation. So all these things are important. And that's why intersectionality, I think, is going beyond the phrase. And I do actually acknowledge what you were saying, that I think it gets thrown around a lot, but I think it needs to start forming the core part of the analysis that we do around D&I.
Thanks, Asif. And you also mentioned about people fitting into boxes. So I've got a question for you. How can we make our events more inclusive to people that either fit into more than one box, i.e. the sort of intersectionality concept, or don't fit in any at all? So, for example, I've got a colleague at work where when she completes forms, she actually falls in the other box, which is, you know, obviously not very nice. And what can we do as D&I practitioners, or people that just have a genuine interest in being more inclusive?
Yeah, no, definitely. So again, I mean, I'm sharing my views, and you know, people might agree, might disagree, but then that's the beauty of diversity, right? We shouldn't all agree. But I think one of the challenges we have is when we don't communicate in an inclusive way, and I think that's quite challenging, because you have events, and I've been to events where, you know, it's about ethnicity, but they're not inclusive. If you know, if you're not from an ethnic minority background, you can almost feel threatened or worried or scared, or feel like someone's going to you know, blame you for all the wrongs that exist. And I think therefore it's important that, you know, we change our language. We start talking about events and discussing topical issues, but in an inclusive way, in a welcoming way, because at the end of the day, you know, what I'm a big believer of that. There's no point in speaking to the people who already understand the challenges or the battle. Same with International Women's Day. You know, there's no point in having events which only women are attending. We need the men to turn up to really influence change and make a difference. But why are the men not turning up? You know, how do we change the language? How do we make it about, you know, how do we make it about everyone, so that they turn up and understand the challenges that women face? So I think inclusive communication and language is one of the big elements.
Thanks so much, Asif. And I suppose moving on from that conversation, you mentioned there about, you said about sort of women-only events and bringing men, you know, that's what we call allies and champions. And having run BEEqual, which was formerly Women in Tech London, we did experience things like reverse sexism. And then obviously you've also got to take into consideration those conversations around targets, you know, and quotas. And I suppose my question, Rose, you might be able to support us on this. How have you successfully engaged allies and champions who may have had opposing views on the subject?
Right, what we've actually done within DEFRA, our organisation, the network has reached out to, we've got like our senior leaders, so we have sponsors and we have allies who are non-BAME people, and we invite them to actually sponsor and support the network. So they come to events, We've got mentoring. We have an engagement, a bit like what Sadiq said. It's like we changed the language. So we've reached out to people of colour and, you know, invited them to our events. We'll invite them to do training with our members so that they don't feel isolated, because a lot of the times they're going to be managers of people of colour anyway, and they get more of an understanding if once they start engaging. So that's what we've done with the network. So yeah, we just build allies. So I go out and I look for allies. So Katie, Aubrey, watch out, I'm looking for allies. So yeah, that's what we actually do.
Always, Rose.
Yeah.
Love the fact that we got some love in the room. And
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Asif, because obviously you're on we are in celebrating International Women's Day, but this webinar is all about gender balance, and obviously you're a male panelist on an International Women's Day webinar. How can we make you feel more comfortable and part of the community as an ally and champion to the cause?
So so I think one of the things is, and this again is my own views, is that I think we need to move beyond men being allies and champions, but we need to change the conversation to men having a stake in this agenda. And you know, I always look at it even from a personal perspective. You know, I when it comes to things like you know, flexible working, work-life balance, all those things are hugely important to me because I've got a young family, and therefore the conversation is definitely about me, and I've got a daughter, and you know, there's numerous reasons why it's an important conversation to me. But I think once we change the conversation to involve men, then you get more buy-in and more action. The problem sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, but with having people as allies or, you know, champions, is it's almost like an honorary title that they hold, but they don't do much or don't take much action. So we really need to shift the dial from having champions and allies to actually having them actively involved.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Asif. And a question for everyone, really, if we can take it in turns. Do you still experience outward prejudice? And if that happens, what is your method with dealing with it? And I know that everyone's come from a different background, but it would really be great to understand everyone's journey. So, Asif, do you want to start?
Wow. Okay. So outward prejudice. It's interesting. I think one of the challenges when it comes to any sort of prejudice, bias, stereotype, or any element like that is where there's assumptions made. So one of the things I talk quite a lot about is, you know, I've never been offended if someone asks me with the right intent. It's when people form a judgment on what's right for me or what I would fit into is where it goes really wrong. And I think the best way around it is having those honest conversations, and you know, the intent being in the right place. And just to put that into perspective, or to give you an example, you know, it's like one of the things I get a lot is, you know, it must have been quite difficult for you growing up, and you know, when I explore the question, what I usually get is, you know, coming from a lower socioeconomic background and so on. My background is East African. I'm from Kenya. I went to private school for the majority of my education. So I've not had those challenges. But because people have been taught somewhere that people who look like me generally have this, it's a false assumption. And it works not just for ethnicity, it works for, you know, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and so on. But it's quite a worrying trend, because where diversity should be doing a positive thing, it's almost going back to my boxer situation, that it's defined these in people's minds what the needs of different people are, and that causes this real sort of challenge around you know, how people view others, because there's assumptions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Asif. Aubrey, do you want to share your experiences?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I still have people that feel the need to say things to me or next to me or within earshot. I still haven't quite worked out whether Uber drivers are being horrible to me when I get in the car and I'm man, and then when I get out I'm Mr, because either I don't know whether they can see me in the rear mirror or it's just my voice. But that's that probably happens 95% of my Uber journeys. But I'm quite lucky that my girlfriend is with me often, and she's quite protective of me. So when people tend to say things, you will usually find her very quickly following up with you in public, which is quite nice because I don't have to do it anymore. But yeah, it's like I'd say it's much less common, especially after I've had my facial feminization surgery. But you know, I'm 6'8", I do look different, and people often feel the need to either stare or comment on that.
Thanks, Aubrey. Katie, do you want to share any prejudices you've experienced and your method for dealing with it?
Yeah, sure. So it's always a bizarre one when I sort of give a little background to this. Not in my current workplace, the place that I've worked a little while ago. I definitely face a lot of discrimination and prejudice for being not only a woman, but a young woman, and a young woman from a not very affluent area. So if we go back to what Asif was saying earlier, with these boxes, I didn't fit into the box of being a woman in the workplace, because the women that were saying things towards me, or the people that were saying things towards me, were women. So I fitted into that box, but I was then younger than those people. I was then from a different background to those people. So no one had quite worked with someone who had fit into these 3 different boxes, rather than this one box, which was, she's fine because she's a woman, and 90% of the people who work here are female. I ended up like very sort of verbal prejudice. So surprisingly, I was called a glamorized plaster, which I've never heard in my life. A dolly bird. So this person's in a management position because of insinuated actions that possibly could have happened, questions about how I got to a place, how I got into my role. And until I was in that situation, I'd never faced that before. As a person who identifies as a woman, I've obviously faced discrimination and prejudice in multiple areas of my life, but never had I faced that before. And I think probably the best thing I did was talk to somebody about it. So not sit there, internalize it, harbor on it, but actually speak to my colleagues about it and say, so this just happened, like, have you had that before? And if not, like, what's the best route to go there? I think a lot of people can start workplaces brand new and be scared to find out what the routes are for escalation, escalating it to your line manager, to people above your line manager, and actually saying and letting people know that this thing does still happen. And if it does happen to you, you're not alone, because it's happened to a lot of people. And I think the second thing that I would say for people who are facing or faced it before, or probably may face it in the future, is don't take what they say as what you are. Someone's words and someone's opinions of you don't make you as a person. So yeah, they're probably my words on this one.
Thanks, Katie. Rose, do you want to share your experiences?
Have I faced, was it outward prejudice? I think I would say yes, but actually it's very subtle, and it is within the work environment. And I think as people of colour, we face it all the time. I could give many incidences. For example, working with ministers, answering the phone to somebody who said to me, oh, they should be ashamed to have you working this late. You know, they ruined your country. I was like, my country, I was born here. She was like, well, they shouldn't let you be working so late. And she went on, she said, obviously you're from Africa. Yeah, maybe I was, but actually my parents are West Indians and whatsoever. So this lady then took a thing to call every Friday, and she felt that the minister should actually, they were enslaving me. She was very right. They were enslaving me with working long hours and whatsoever. And my manager at the time was an English guy. And he was like, Rose, I'll deal with this. But the thing was, when he got on the phone, she slated him for being a slave owner and enslaving me. And he really, you know, he felt uncomfortable, one, because this person was speaking to me in a way, and two, because he didn't know how to handle it. And I thought, actually, when I spoke to her again, and I said to her, look, you know, it's not necessary. Yes, slavery did happen, but actually we've all got to learn to work together. And she was fine. She was an aristocrat or whatever she was, but she was fine. And, you know, I spoke to her and my manager was like, he was more embarrassed than I was about the situation, because I'm born here, grew up here. I don't really see, I know that we do have prejudice. And yet again, it's an age thing, it's a generation thing. I have I've got 2 daughters, and they always say to me, Mum, you see colour, but it is a generation thing. And I think what somebody was saying about being in the box, I'm of a certain age where really our school was not that diverse. So whereas my daughter's schools, they don't see colour, they have a multi-racial friendship and they really don't see colour. So even in their working environment, they don't see, if they have an issue, they don't see it's because of their colour. They always say, no, as a person, different generations. So barriers that we have to break down. The younger generations are more multicultural, they are more mixed. They don't see the hurdles that we of a certain generation see. But then when we come into a work environment, like the civil service, we've got lots of barriers to break down. Been in it a long time, barriers are slowly breaking down, but we still have a long way to go. And there is a lot of prejudice. As you can see, we've got our seniors, we've got, you know, how many of them are BAME, you know, creeping up that invisible pipeline whatsoever, a bit like what Katie said. Not only are you a woman, but if you're a black woman, and even if you're a male, it's 10 times harder. 1, to get through all the processes. 2, to get out of the box, which you're automatically put in. 1, the social economical box. 2, you haven't got the qualifications, no matter if you've been working on the job for X amount of time. 3, not only do you don't talk the right way, you don't write the right way. So there's a number of barriers that, yeah, our networks and other networks and, you know, everything else, EDI, all of these things are there to break down the barriers, change the whole working environment. So we just got to keep going, plugging on.
So Rose, we've got some follow-up questions from your conversation around people of colour. Now, before I go on to the question, I also want to give my own example. So I was at a D&I event with a summer party, and the whole room was full of D&I practitioners. And in the same conversation, I was having one person tell me I can't use the term race, and I was having the other person telling me that you can't use the term BAME because they're both offensive. And, you know, I felt like trying to bang their heads together thinking, if you can't decide between you and you're from that community, how on earth as a white person, you know, am I going to be able to deal with this? And we've just got a question in who seems to have experienced something similar, and that is my US colleagues who are people of colour, in brackets, really don't like the term don't see colour, and they've asked, is there a generational or geographic difference in how we look at this?
Yeah, for me personally, I think there definitely is a generation, you know, because it is a generational thing. And I think even more so, like, you know, we've got the civil rights movement in America, nothing to what we have here, but it's definitely a generational thing. And it's also, like, for me, going back, knowing your roots, I was always connected to where my parents, they came post Windrush. So actually, they were the early starters here. They were invited here. So it is a generation. There's a different way, I think, you think about it. If you would sort of, like I say, my daughters are millennium children. They have a different view from me. They, you know, I've made them aware that it's not to say that it's an issue. It's just to say that actually you've got to be aware. You've got to be open. Not everybody's going to see you as, you know, they see their friends. For example, I've got a niece. She went to university in Lincoln, and actually she was spat on. She was with her student friends walking. They'd all been out to the pub or something. They weren't drunk. She promises me they weren't drunk. But anyway, they were walking along the road, and she was the only person of colour with about 6 girls, and a guy spat in her face. Now, for one, she's a lot lighter than I am, so actually she could be classed, or somebody would say she was mixed, but she's not. And an English guy spat in her face and called her certain names. Now, the thing about it, it was quite traumatizing because she'd never experienced any racism. Yeah, she just never experienced it. All her friends had accepted her as she is, never experienced, first time of racism. And when we got the call, we was like, you need to report this, report it to the police. It's a racial attack. And she was like, no, I don't want to make a fuss. And I said to her, look, if you don't report things like this, okay, you've come away and you're saying that it's all right. But it made such an impact on her. She was studying to be a vet. She'd done 3 years, 4 years out there, and she's changed completely. Don't want to do veterinary, don't want to do whatsoever. She's still working in medicines, but she came out of it altogether because of this one incident, because she just felt that she needed to come back to London, where she was in a community where she could feel more comfortable rather than be out in the sticks. And I was like, that's wrong. This is not the way that things are supposed to be happening, but they're happening. So yeah, definitely a generation thing as well.
We've just had
I've sort of ragged on there a bit.
we just had a comment with a sad face going, so much goes unreported, and it's true.
Yes, so much.
Just to go back to Asif now, because you might be able to help us come up with some solutions to dealing with this. So if someone tells you, I don't like the term don't see colour, or I don't like the term BAME, I don't like the term race, for people that either are or are not in that community, it's irrelevant. What do you do? Because everyone's telling me to use the word BAME, it's politically correct, but it puts you in such a situation.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the interesting thing is, again, there's this notion that what one person will find acceptable, you know, another will not. So what do I mean by that? I mean, I'll give you an example, right? I mean, if I'm not fine with one term, my brother, who looks very similar to me, he might be fine with it. And the difficulty is not what terms or what do we use. I think it goes back to my initial response around the intent, because if we would say what, you know, because everyone has their own lived experiences, and depending on what people's experiences are or what factors have contributed to you know, their sort of state when it comes to D&I, you get a different response. You know, sometimes the most harmless thing, you find that, you know, you say it to someone and you get a really sort of aggressive response. Now, people wonder, why do you get that? But the thing is, you don't know what that term means to that individual, you know, what's aligned to it. I mean, if for example, BAME has been used in a negative way by my previous, I don't know, manager, I'm making this up, by the way, but, you know, against me, then if you use BAME, I might find it offensive. Now, that's not saying you're wrong or I'm wrong, but it's just understanding that, you know, different lived experiences mean different outcomes and how people view terms. I do think, again, though, it's the intent. How do we ensure that we ask and we explore, and also agree when the answer isn't what we're expecting? And this I always find quite challenging, that when someone asks something, and I'll give you an example. Many years ago, when I was in the police service, I was at a senior leadership dinner, and someone came up to me, and one of the senior officers was like, "Oh, so your name's Asif. Would you like to be called?" And I'm like, "Asif." And she's like, "Well, I've got Mohammed in my team, and he likes to be called Mo." And I'm like, "That's Mohammed in your team. I've got a 4-letter word. That's my name, and that's what I like to be called." And she couldn't comprehend it, because the answer was she wanted it to be her way. And I'm like, no, that's fine. And I've got nothing wrong with Mohammed being called Mo, but I'm me, and I want to be called my name. And she found that quite offensive. And it's that kind of thing. I don't know if I'm making sense, but what I'm trying to say is that it's unique. And words are offensive to different people. Some are not. But I do think terms, especially on race, like BAME, BME, I am not personally a big fan, and the only reason for that is, when have you ever seen the phrase used in a positive light? You know, that BAME overachiever, BAME senior leader. You never get it. It's always in a BAME underachievers, BAME not getting this, BAME not getting. And I think that creates a negative. It already sets us off on that we're not that good.
See, I totally understand your point, and you know, everyone's different. Everyone has their own experiences in dealing with it. But there's a but here, because I'm a D&I practitioner, and I openly acknowledge that it's really, really hard to stay on top of the correct terminology and to not offend people. I mean, it changes every day. 1 minute it's unconscious bias, the next it's conscious inclusion. And for anyone that doesn't sit in a D&I role and just wants to make sure that they are being sensitive to everyone, when it comes to using the right terminology, it's really hard. And then what happens is, if you say BAME and they say, no, we don't like that, use race, and then the next person says, you're not supposed to use race, you're supposed to say BAME, it stops people from having conversations about this, and fear gets generated. And I want to know if you've got any top tips for dealing with this, because we're not
Sure.
in I space, and I'm sure there's so many people logged on who've had an awkward conversation and now just don't want to mention race, you know, and just completely ignore it. Which
and I totally get where you're coming from, and so my response to that, you know, as I've said, is that of course you want to encourage people who do, and it's not about terminology, right? Not everyone's going to know it, not everyone's going to get it right. But so I'd place that question in a slightly different way. So if this training was about talking to white men, would we be worrying about whether to call them white men, or would we be saying let's just talk to them as genuine human interactions and having that sort of, you know, general conversation? We don't need to worry about what their ethnicity is or how to refer to them. We just talk to them, and that's what we do. I mean, I'm sure each and every one of you in your workplace, when you talk to the majority, which is usually sort of straight white men, we don't worry too much about what to refer to them as. So why do we have to sort of get hung up on what to refer to me as rather than me as me? Is my view.
Okay, I totally get that.
Can I say something, Harriet? In our organisation, we have got Project Race, and this organisation really needed more than Project Race, but it has had an impact. And Project Race they've held workshops with, like Asif said, the workshops are for everybody to go, but they've started with our senior leaders. A number of these workshops, the feedback, like the Project Race team, there were only 2, there are now 3 of them, struggled at these workshops by the engagement or lack of engagement, because we have unconscious bias. So everybody thinks they've got to tick a box, go to a Project Race workshop, I've ticked my diversity box, done. But when some of these managers, middle managers, turned up at a Project Race workshop, one, they definitely weren't connected. They weren't connected with anything to do with diversity. And a lot of them were managers who had team members from a diverse background, weren't interested. So much so that some managers felt that they did not need to attend a Project Race workshop. Let's talk race. They did not need to address the elephant in the room, and they were happy not to do it. But then again, they still went back to their day jobs. They put all excuses as why they couldn't go to a Project Race, go back to manage teams, and they would contribute to some really, really awful working conditions of how they were treating their staff, despite what was going on. So much so that through the networks, through the unions, that more accountability of some of our middle managers, and you can now see a change. So yeah, Project Race has had a good impact. So let's see what happens after its sort of closure. But yeah.
Thanks so much, Rose. Can't wait to keep on top of that. I am going to sort of park the race conversation, because I know that we've got so many topics that we want to cover today. But obviously, if it comes up again, I don't want to stop it. But I just want to for some more questions around the other themes. But before we move on, someone's just given a really great example of where BAME has been used in a positive light. It's on Facebook. Head over to the education page, and it's called the BAME to Boardroom Career Coach. So check that out and let me know if it's any good. Thanks so much, Brian. So I'm going to go on to the conversation around gender, and Aubrey, it'd be great to hear your perspective of this. Obviously, you have the most unique perspective on the room on this. So, Aubrey, you have a very unique perspective on gender in the tech industry. How does your experience differ from being both a man and a woman in the workplace? I know that's a sensitive question, so thank you.
Yeah, definitely an interesting question to talk about. I think probably like when I started taking hormones, I think maybe it was like a month into it when I was sitting in a meeting with a bunch of Oracle executives, and that's I know, burst into tears. And it's the kind of meeting that would make you burst into tears with a bunch of Oracle execs. But I messaged the guy next to me and said, like, I'm crying and I can't stop. I'm gonna walk out. So I walked out and had to explain to him that I'd started taking hormones like a month earlier, and then suddenly like I was very ill prepared for the sudden rush of like emotion that I didn't have before. I think as a guy, you tend to just get angry inside and people can't see it, and you can internalize like a ton of stuff. But as a woman, I found that it just sort of bleeds out involuntarily, and the like when it's anger or frustration, everything seems to manifest in one way, which is tears. And then, you know, you quite quickly you'll get called, you know, sensitive or emotional or something like that. And you know, it all gets lumped into one category in it. So you find yourself trying to explain to the guys, like, you're reading this one particular way, but it means a multitude of things. It just looks the same. You know, you just consider what it was that triggered it. That's been quite interesting. I think, you know, the whole journey through transition of being like a 6'8" like transgender woman and trying to explain to the guys around you when, you know, you're crying at them and they're like, well, what the fuck do I do? I've got this massive woman like crying at me. I'm not prepared for this, and neither are you prepared for it. And that's been quite difficult. I decided very early in the journey that, you know, I could either be a victim about it or I could just push my way through it. And so I did, because like what I found was that every day, you know, especially early on when you're not hitting the mark and you're incredibly insecure about yourself, and like it's a process where you don't just wake up and you look like a woman, you look like shit for a really long time, to be completely blunt, and it lasts for years. And, you know, as a contractor, like I have to go to work every day or I don't get paid. So I have to look like shit and not hit the mark and know that, and go to work and deal with that every day for years until we hit the mark. That's a super difficult thing. And so you get quite hardened to the abuse when people say things to you, which happens a lot in the early stage because you don't pass and you don't look so good and you haven't had surgery and you don't have all the traits that people look for to put you into a category. Or, you know, there are folks that will still call me and say I'm, you know, and you know straight away on the phone they'll say I'm looking to speak to Aubrey Stearn, and that means they haven't read my voice. Or, you know, some people get really hung up and they say, I'm looking at a picture of a woman on LinkedIn, and you're like, yeah, I'll just explain to you I'm transgender. Like that stuff happens. I think it was probably maybe like a year, 2 years until I started to notice the like gender undercurrent, that like when guys float out of the office magically and they just huddle around the pub, and that's like a magnet thing that just happens, and they just don't say anything and sort of grunt at each other and end up at the pub, but they don't invite women. And I think women look for an invitation quite often to these events rather than end up in the undercurrent floating to the pub with them. We look for an invitation to be invited, and it was quite interesting realizing that. And I remember when I thought, oh, I don't know whether I'm changing or people are just not inviting me to things, or I've just stopped floating, and I had to go and figure out what was it me that changed, or was it everybody else that changed, or they just noticed that you know, I fall into a different category. That was interesting as well. I think it's been quite useful to go through this, because I remember as a guy being a manager, I used to run my teams quite hard. I was a bit of an asshole, to be honest. And I remember like women getting upset at me, and I just thought I'd won. You know, that was the internal response of like, I'm calm, they're angry and crying, you know, that's fine. And then on the other side of it, like now it's me. It's like you just can't control that shit. It just bleeds out, and it's really can be super embarrassing. Like the other day, I was sitting in an exco meeting, crying in front of like the entire exco of Oakam, just out of frustration. And it's something that when I come into a business, like I have to brief people and say, you know, I'm a 35-year-old woman, but my mastery of like hormones is literally only like almost coming up for 4 years now. So it's not like I'm more like your 14, 15-year-old daughter in terms of like my mastery of my hormones. And it's quite a difficult thing to comprehend that my reaction is just not always what everyone else's reaction is. And I find it very hard to control them still. And you know, I think I have the resilience of maybe like 1 or 2 days of intense stress, but then after that I tend to crack, and it takes a while to get over it. It's definitely like you can go on forever about this subject, but there's definitely those little undercurrents and things that I've noticed, or you know, when you have folks that talk over women in meetings, like I've noticed that like an awful lot. And I think being the big, loud, deep voiced person that I am, I'm quite quick to step in and tell people to shut up. And that's fine because I can, and I have that personality and that presence. I think a lot of people don't realize they do it, and because I'm quite hyper aware of it, I want to make sure that we have a platform for everybody when I create these environments to contribute to and to be able to stand on and have that equal footing. So you know, I do step in quite often and try and create that space for folks to be able to come forward, you know, especially, you know, introvert folks in the team that, you know, don't always find it easy to come forward. You know, you extend that invitation to them and give them the ability to step forward into the light.
So Aubrey, thanks so much for that. So insightful. Just to summarise for everyone, having experienced both perspectives in the tech industry, what would be your 3 top tips for making it more inclusive, having both been a white male and a white female?
To make it more inclusive, definitely a challenging question. I mean, I think Katie mentioned earlier that they had used tools to scan CVs for gender inclusive language, or sorry, job specs for gender inclusive language. I think that was actually quite useful because I hadn't realised that I reviewed documents that we have at Oakam from maybe 9-10 years ago, and I found like a ton of like gender bias. Actually, one of our documents we used the word he 11 times, him 3 times, and she and her 0 times. And it's quite interesting because I would never have noticed that 4 years ago. But I see little things. So things like that are quite nice. And I would say, you know, if you want to hire more female engineers, like I'm not being funny, but like I pick up on this and they would definitely pick up on this. So let's try and be better about it. So I think gender neutral language is quite useful. I think the fact that, again, like people have different things, you would never know it. Like if you knew me personally, you would never know that I struggle taking the tube in the morning. But I had so many people either laugh or point at me. I think there was one morning when I stepped on the tube and I had like a full carriage full of like Chinese students laughing and pointing at me. Probably in the first year of transition, and it left like a really deep mark, and it left me terrified of taking the tube. And there were a ton of examples of that. And so every morning I had this massive anxiety taking the tube. And it's the one thing every morning that I struggle to deal with in London. And there was a point where I used to take Ubers every morning to work to avoid taking the tube because I just couldn't deal with it. And I think, you know, it's made me very conscious that other people have things like that where they deal with where, you know, either they would get anxiety or they're not able to say like, you know, this is not a good time for me for whatever reason, I have some trauma or something. So just being aware that some folks can't even tell you what it is that bothers them, but there's a thing that bothers them, and just trying to create the space for to work around it without having to ask like why. I think that's quite useful. And on the third, I'm not sure. You know, I've had people join my team last year who joined because I'm me. That was a really weird thing. Like, I'm joining your team because you're Aubrey, Stearn and you're different, and I was really shocked that was a thing. And I think I also met some people who were C-level execs who were gay as well last year, and I think that was a really big moment for me, actually kind of emotional one, because I had never met other C-level execs who were also gay or, you know, LGBT, and that was really, it was quite powerful, and I hadn't realised what a moment it was to find people at that level also, you know, because I've been very bullish climbing my way up the ladder. So I don't know, I think maybe actually having folks in an organisation at that level is quite an inspiring thing, and just sort of make you think, you know, I can also get there. That's could be my third.
Thanks, Aubrey. And just to continue the conversation around pronoun use. Now, I don't know if anyone else has been in a situation where they may have used the wrong pronoun, and of course unintentionally, and that may have been met with some anger or upset from the recipient. You know, and there's apologising, and then when they continue to be angry or upset, it'd be really great if you could give us some advice on dealing with.
Sure. I think, you know, sometimes you make mistakes. Again, like when you hear my voice, if you heard my voice on the phone, I'd probably just sound like a bloke. I imagine, you know, I know from empirical evidence of people calling me that that's the case. I think when you meet me or you hear me on webcam, like I mentioned to you, Harry, that I was nervous about doing this because there would be no webcam and people wouldn't get to see me. And I think, you know, when I visually present, it's quite easy to see, you know, which gender I align with. But without those cues that I've learned to build in my life, it's, you know, you're reliant on raw things that are, you know, I don't have any power to change at the moment. I guess you go with your intelligence. You know, somebody presents a particular way. If you're in doubt, you can ask. I don't think that's particularly offensive in my opinion. If you upset somebody, which happens, like, and honestly, like, this is usually not somebody's fault, but in the first year, I can't tell you how many times I burst into tears in public, or walked into a restaurant and just reacted with like, really? Like, I'm fucking standing there in a dress and you're calling me sir. Like, I mean, do you get a lot of people like that in your restaurant? Like, it's quite a frustrating thing. And like, I can tell you that's because in your head you have this model and you're like, that's where your bar is, and you're like hitting the mark. And then when someone, you know, messes up your pronouns, like, that model is completely invalidated. You're like, I'm not hitting the mark at all. I have failed miserably in my attempt today. And that's kind of what I meant about scraping you off like the floor every day, because every day something like that happens, and especially in the first year, it happens every day. And every day you have to go and do it again. You get to wake up, and whether there's somebody there to say it's okay, you know, these things are going to happen, or you don't have that person to do that and it's just you have to wake up and do it again the next day. And so you become incredibly hardened to the things. So I would just say sorry, or you know, if you're in doubt, ask, or, you know, just use names, and avoid pronouns altogether is sometimes a good option. It's just one of these things, and it can be a minefield, and it's a minefield, like, you know, a bipartisan minefield for the person, you know, who's probably getting cried at, and the person probably in tears.
Thanks, Aubrey. That's honestly so helpful. We've actually got a question, quite an interesting question, very niche, probably something only you can answer, Aubrey, and then we'll move on to some more general questions around inclusivity. So this individual's 13-year-old is gender non-conforming, male to female, and is curious about hormone treatment, specifically hormone blockers. Do you have any advice on when is a good age to start, as the newspaper articles are very scared-mongering? Be understandable.
This is a really difficult, like, as a trans person, like, it's a very difficult subject to answer on. I know lots of folks that would say, like,
and do an intro to the person that's asking the question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do an intro for everyone. To the person asking the question, Aubrey, because I know that's a very individual question and something that is probably quite niche to the audience. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on to some more sort of general questions that people can go away with and hopefully use in their own organisations. So, Katie, this one's for you. Be great to hear you. How important is it to engage with diverse communities? Exactly what we're trying to do today.
It is so important. So I think it's difficult. So the word diversity is almost suggesting that diversity is the opposite of the norm, right? That's basically what the word insinuates. And I think we need to question currently what is the norm? What does the norm look like in our community, in our society, in our workplace? So let's say, for example, Department for Education. We are a civil service department, and we build products, we build services, we build apps, websites, you name it, for our end users, who might be teachers, they might be social workers, they might be students themselves, they might be childminders, and people of all different backgrounds, of every kind of human being can be in any of those professions. So what happens if actually in the workplace, the people who are building those products, building those services, are all the same person, or all have the same thought process, and there's no diversity of thought, there's no diversity of backgrounds and of influence? You end up building a product or a service that isn't fit for the user. And actually, there have been situations across multiple digital and tech spaces where products have been built with a group of people who don't reflect the communities that they serve. The products, it's gone live, it's shipped, it's gone out to the public, and it's not worked. It is so important that the people building these digital and tech products, these services, reflect the communities that they are going out to and that they are actually creating things for. So I'm just going to link back slightly to what I said earlier and what Aubrey was saying. So we spoke about what Aubrey mentioned about travelling on the tube and how actually sometimes that can make people relatively anxious. One thing that we've been trialling out here is actually being very open about the flexibilities that we offer within the Department of Education when we're putting jobs out. So actually saying, if you would like to work with us, you can have the option of flexible working, no core hours. So actually, if you are in a situation where you wake up in the morning, you go to step on the tube, or you go to get on public transport, which is a big thing for a lot of people, and you cannot do it, it's okay. We can work from home. You don't have these core hours where actually you need to be working 9 to 5, because the world that we live on now isn't 9 to 5. People are working 7 till 7. People are working weekends, people are working evenings. We recognise that we're not all carbon copies of each other who can all do the same job 9 to 5. We have people who get up in the morning the worst, people that work in the evening. Some people just really struggle to work in the mid-afternoon after their lunch. And I think it's so important that not only we recognise like Asif was saying, like the physical and characteristics, things that we see that we know, like we normally associate with diversity, but we're actually talking about like working conditions. So advertising, when you're recruiting for your company, when you're going out, like outwardly facing your public community and saying, if you want to join us, if you want to like work with our services, these are things you can do. You can work from home. You don't have to work 9 to 5 as people may think, because at the end of the day, if you stick to that really solid view of what people should be doing 9 to 5, Monday, Friday in the office, the people you recruit and the people you have in your teams are not going to be diverse. You're going to have a very specific type of person that's not going to reflect the communities that you're serving, and you're going to end up wasting money because your services and your products won't work. But also the people, the end users who are going to benefit the most. For our case, they're people, teachers, like childminder students, people who can be really vulnerable, or people who are influencing the future generations. We have to make sure that our communities are diverse, represent them, so these people can go on and teach our future generations, or can look after children after school. So I think it's incredibly important that the communities that we engage with, the communities we hire and work with, are diverse.
Thanks, Katie. Sorry, Aubrey, we've just got a question that's come in, so it's back on gender, but I think it's really important that this is a safe space to be able to ask this sort of question. And if you wouldn't mind just answering it quite quickly as we're running out of time. You mentioned that you have a girlfriend, but if you are transgender, why do you identify as gay?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, for me, my sexuality never changed. I've always dated women as a boy, and transgender women as a boy, and I guess that was something I spent probably 10 years wrestling with. So being a guy who dates transgender women is a shitty little grey area that doesn't really align to anything, because in any of the eyes of a trans woman dating a guy, they're straight. So that's a really difficult thing to deal with in that situation. But it's a label. So I'm, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a female that dates another female, so that would make me like semantically gay. I don't really dwell on the label. I would actually never call myself a lesbian because I never had to come out in that sense. So it's very hard for me to identify with the term because, I understand what it was like to be a guy who dated trans girls and to really struggle with that for a good 10 years. So I would never use that label because, I imagine there's a ton of pain and things that are really difficult to deal with. So it's not one that I would use. So, but I would say that, yeah, I'm gay and my girlfriend identifies as bisexual because she dates me.
Thanks, Aubrey. That's obviously made it so much clearer for everyone. It's all about personal preference and, how they choose to be perceived. And, we just have to respect that. Now we've got 1 minute just to close. It would be amazing if we could just go around each panelist and get a quick one-liner on what can we do as individuals to be more inclusive and what does equal look like for you? Asif, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think lots been covered about what works. But one of the things I would ask everyone, whoever's listening, is it's not just about being inclusive in the workplace. Everyone should challenge themselves and think of and do an exercise. Actually, write down who your 5 close friends are, and then look at how different they are to you. Because diversity is not just about the workplace, or inclusion is not just about the workplace. We are a reflection of the society that we live in. And you can't pretend to be inclusive at work and then live a not so diverse or not be so inclusive outside of work. So my advice would be start exploring, start being more inclusive, start looking at difference, diversity in all its elements, aspects, and you'll find when you do it naturally, it will come naturally in the workplace.
Thanks, Asif. Aubrey, do you want to give us your top tips on what can we do as individuals to be more inclusive and what does equal look like for you?
Yeah, equal will be when I take an Uber journey and I get called miss the whole way. I think in terms of, again, like inclusivity, and Katie touched on this stuff, people hide all sorts of stuff. And I think just being aware that there are all sorts of things that we may not have mentally considered in our models, and being able to create a flexible one that allows people to still achieve the same outcomes and work within their challenges. This creating that flexibility is something that will go a very long way towards inclusion and diversity for all the hidden things that we can't see.
Amazing, thanks. Katie?
Obviously echoing what Audrey and Asif just said, but I guess being brave, and if you've got a question and if you've got something in your mind, and actually, so people have been pinging up the questions in the chat box and saying, oh, is this the right thing to say, or can I say this? For me, it's about continuing to have that conversation. If you're nervous about saying something, that's okay. If you're in a safe space to ask it, please do ask. Please keep talking about it. Try and educate yourself on things. There are so many articles and videos and TED Talk you can watch now, which will just help you soak in, like Harriet, you were saying about the language. It's never black and white. What answers, what things we should be saying, what language we should be using. So we should be inquisitive and we should be challenging ourselves, like Asif said, challenging others when we see something that's not right, asking about it. And equal, as simple as it may be, is actually the when everybody's treated as human beings, and we stop, I don't know when or if this will happen, we stop seeing all of these boxes we keep putting people in, and we're treated as equal as human beings.
Thanks, Katie. And just to echo that, obviously, I organise BEEqual, which is well, really help anyone, whether you're the receptionist or the CEO, go away and be able to implement inclusion in your organisation. And if you do have any topics that are coming up and you'd like to hear more, please fire them over to me. We're always looking for speakers, venues, ideas and what to do. Just send them over. And Rose, just to close, what would your top tips be for individuals being more inclusive, and what does equal look like for you?
Respecting each other, regardless of, whatever the physical experience, just showing one another respect and love. I don't mean you've got to be hugging everybody, but just respecting each other. And also, for me, again, like Katie, just treat everybody as a human. Treat others as you would want to be treated, regardless of whether you're the CEO or the receptionist or the cleaner, just treat everybody as you would want to be treated, and don't keep putting people in boxes or sticking labels on them, because you don't know what that person is, what's deeper inside that person, what they've got to offer. You just don't know. So just stop sticking labels and just show each other respect. Yep. In the workplace, out of the workplace. And I like Asif's challenge. Your 5 closest friends, mine's all look like me. I'm only challenged when I come to work. And so, yeah, stepping out of my comfort zone is something that I've had to do. And that's through work. And also in our organisation, through the network, we now have diverse interview panels, which is really a big milestone. So everybody get diverse interview panels going, so make a difference. So that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Rose. Absolute massive thank you to all the panelists who have joined today. Again, happy belated International Women's Day. Thanks so much for the audience for participating. I realise that we have had so many questions left to be asked, so just continue the conversation. And just to plug BEEqual, you know, sneak peek, we have got our next event scheduled for the 19th of May. If it's not in person, it will be online, so save the date. And if you are looking for help engaging with diverse technical communities, reach out to me. I love working with different organisations. So end of plug. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your week. All right then. Bye.
Thanks, Harriet.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.